Chapter 1. An Extra Chair at Texas Instruments. The path to a dream is a fickle thing. It can begin with the moment you suddenly become self-aware, or with a clear goal sketched on a piece of paper. Sometimes it starts with a hint from a loved one, and other times from a picture on the television that suddenly feels more real than your own living room. No, it also happens that the path begins simply because the dream itself intended it so. And dreams, as we know, have a strange sense of humor. Dallas, 2009. A city that smells of heated asphalt and big ambitions. The Texas Instruments office is not just a building, it is a monument. It was once founded by four men: Cecil Green, J. Eric Johnson, Eugene McDermott, and Patrick Haggerty. They built the future out of semiconductors and logic. Today, this massive machine required people, real professionals, devoted, reliable, the kind who don't quit halfway through, even if the task seems hopeless. Every single day, the secretary received dozens of applications. In these forms, applicants swore their loyalty, yearned to become part of a big and happy team, and used all those words typically written by people who very much want to receive a paycheck twice a month. Exactly at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 interviews were scheduled. Position: System Design Engineer. A serious job for serious people. 2 people were already sitting in front of the manager's office: Laura and Brian. They were in full gear, their suits so pressed you could cut yourself on the creases. They were complete strangers to each other, but that didn't stop them from being competitors. They sat in the hallway, smiling at each other with the most polite of all the fake smiles in the world, secretly hating each other with the same intensity with which they wanted this job. Because in the adult world, recognition is a scarce commodity. And then the office doors opened again. On the third chair, which until that moment had seemed absolutely redundant, sat a young boy. He looked about 15 years old. Well, 15 at most, assuming he was losing sleep studying for algebra exams. Silence hung in the hallway. But it wasn't the kind of silence you find in libraries. It was the kind of silence that turns into a roar of thoughts. Laura and Brian stared at him. The boy silently nodded to them in greeting, pulled a whole stack of papers from his hands, sorted through them with a strange, almost elderly calmness, and began to wait submissively. Here, we need to take a pause, because if you think this boy simply mistook the door or came to pick up his father's house keys, you are mistaken. This was Clayton, and he was 28 years old. In Clayton's life, there were many things that seemed not to be what they actually were. To end up in this chair, he had already passed 2 stages of phone interviews, and believe me, they were far from the most pleasant. He had sent in his blueprints, diagrams, and calculations. He had answered endless, sometimes completely unnecessary questions of HR managers who were trying to understand how his brain worked. He had slowly, step by step, pushed his candidacy through the thickets of bureaucracy. They had said yes to him. They had scheduled a meeting. And that, he thought, was enough to start a great career. But now, let's look at Clayton again through the eyes of the people in that hallway. Something clearly didn't add up. And to understand why an engineer with a brilliant mind looks like a schoolboy skipping gym class, we'll have to explain a bit more than just naming some clever term from a medical manual. Clayton lived an ordinary life, right up until the moment that overturned his consciousness and almost broke him from the inside.
Chapter 2. The Foundation and 20 Floors of Glass. Life is what happens to you while you're making plans for it. And sometimes life is just a mirror you look into one day and don't recognize the person looking back at you. Clayton lived a perfectly ordinary life until that very moment that overturned his consciousness. It happened at the end of summer. You know, that special time when the air gets a little cooler and shops start selling notebooks that smell of the hope that this year you'll definitely study better. Meeting classmates after the holidays should have brought joy, but instead it brought Clayton the realization that the world around him had suddenly increased in scale, forgetting to ask his opinion. Clayton sat in his usual place in class. No completely unfamiliar people began to appear around him. They were 2 heads taller than the boys he had played ball with just 3 months ago. They were genuinely glad to see him. They slapped him on the shoulder with their huge palms, while Clayton sat there not quite understanding what was even going on. All his friends had acquired new silhouettes over one summer. His best friend and comrade, Charlie, even showed up with a mustache. Charlie hadn't bought it at a souvenir shop or glued it on for a joke. It had simply grown under his nose as if it were meant to be there. And the girls? They were precisely young women now, not girls. Their presence made Clayton feel out of place. It was as if he had remained in an old version of an operating system while everyone else had downloaded an update. After some time, Clayton finally decided to approach his father. He needed someone to explain why the world had become so tall. His father was a large mass of muscle. He was a man who, by his mere appearance, could make it clear. Any argument with him would be lost before you even opened your mouth. His father worked in construction. He dealt with metal, wood, and guys just as tough as himself. People like that usually have answers to all questions, even if those answers consist of only a few words. Clayton sat down next to him and began describing everything he saw: Charlie's mustache, the height of his classmates, and his own frightening sense of stillness. He admitted that he also wanted to be a little taller. He wanted to resemble his father in some way. His father looked at his son and smiled, that same smile worn by people who know a bit more than others about the weight of this world. "Listen, Clayton," he said, "we build houses, and believe me, when we see a freshly poured foundation, none of us can even imagine that in a couple of years there'll be 20 floors of glass and concrete here." It was an attempt to comfort, an attempt to make him understand that the period of puberty had just decided to slow down a bit so Clayton could take a better look at the road. But a year later, the conversation repeated, only this time his father initiated it. He looked at his son and wanted to put this puzzle together no less than Clayton did. Eventually, they turned to doctors. They took the boy under observation, armed with tables and charts. Clayton's growth stubbornly refused to match the usual standard for a ninth grader. While his peers had already reached 5.25 feet, Clayton himself stalled at the 3.94 feet mark. Doctors prescribed medications, suggested supplements, and gave endless advice. Clayton honestly took everything. But in the graduation album, he sat in the front row with his diploma in hand, looking like a younger brother who had just been allowed to participate in the solemn ritual for the sake of a nice photo. He had to come to terms with it. It just so happened that our hero was stuck in the body of a teenager. He was trapped in his own reality, like in a room from which someone had taken the keys. His classmates, to their credit, accepted his uniqueness, unlike himself, unlike the rest of the world. Clayton's least favorite moment in life became the one when he had to hand his driver's license to a police officer. Officers usually looked at the document, then at him, and asked, "Where are your parents, buddy?" But time passed, and gradually Clayton began to accept himself this way. Because after all, if you can't change the building, you have to learn to live in the foundation you have.
Chapter 3. The Man Who Didn't Come. In the Texas Instruments office, time stretched slowly, like molasses on a cold day. When you sit in a waiting room, time ceases to be linear. It turns into a ticking in your temples. Clayton was the last one left. Laura and Brian had already disappeared behind the doors, leaving behind only the scent of expensive perfume and a faint trail of unjustified ambitions. The secretary's phone rang. The sound in the quiet office was like a gunshot. "Yes, Mr. Gordon?" "Yes, of course. That's all for today." The secretary hung up and started gathering papers with the look of someone whose workday was already over, and Clayton was just part of the interior, a floor vase that someone forgot to move. Clayton stood up. He did it carefully, the way people do when they are used to not taking up extra space. He approached the desk and laid down his documents. "Is my meeting with Mr. Gordon being postponed?" he asked. His voice sounded calm and mature, but the secretary didn't even flinch. She looked at him the way one looks at a child who lost their mother in a shopping mall. "Sorry, kid," she said, and there was no malice in her eyes, only absolute lack of understanding. "What exactly do you mean?" Standing before her was a person barely taller than her nephew, and the idea that he could be applying for an electronic device engineer position simply didn't fit in her head. "I've been seeking this meeting for 3 months," Clayton explained politely. "I wouldn't want to let Mr. Gordon down." At that moment, the office door swung open. Mr. Gordon walked out. In one hand, he had a briefcase. In the other, the haste of a man with too much to do and too little patience. "I'm off to a meeting and then back," he tossed to the secretary, not even glancing at the teenager by the desk. "Good day, Mr. Gordon." Clayton took a step forward. "My name is Clayton. We spoke 4 days ago. I was invited as a candidate for the system engineer position. You scheduled me for today and asked me not to be late." Mr. Gordon froze. He fell into that kind of stupor where the brain desperately tries to match a file on the computer with the reality on the monitor, but the system returns an error. He had never before had to reject peers of his own son, and Mr. Gordon's son happened to be 14 years old, and that very 5.25 feet in height that the miracle of medicine had never been able to pull Clayton up to. Mr. Gordon cringed inside. He looked at Clayton and saw a child. I have to go now," he squeezed out, tilting his head slightly as if trying to view Clayton from a different angle. "But I'll be back in 2 hours. Can we continue our conversation then?" "Yes, of course, sir," Clayton nodded. "I assure you I will wait. Thank you for giving me a chance."
Mr. Gordon left the office, still not understanding what had just happened. He had answered Clayton the way he usually answered his son when he didn't want to bother with long explanations. Clayton sat back down on the chair. Lately, he had become a true expert at sitting on chairs waiting for conversations that often ended in nothing. He had visited many places. Everywhere he was rejected. The reasons were clear, although they were never voiced aloud. In the adult world, no one wants to hire an engineer they feel like patting on the cheek. Clayton simply trusted the situation. 2.5 hours passed. The secretary tried her best to pretend she wasn't examining him like a curious museum exhibit. She was doing a terrible job of it. Clayton felt her gaze on his skin, but he had long ago learned to let such looks pass through him, like light through glass. Finally, he stood up. He neatly gathered his documents, drawings, and diagrams into his briefcase. He thanked the secretary for the coffee. She still didn't speak to him. She simply didn't know what to say, and more than anything in the world, was afraid of appearing foolish, or even worse, rude. Clayton didn't blame her. Put yourself in her shoes. The world doesn't prepare us for meeting 28-year-old engineers the size of a 4th grader. He got into his car, buckled up, turned the key. He wasn't angry. He had lived through this situation so many times that it had become like a worn-out film strip. "It's okay, everything's fine," he told himself as he drove out of the parking lot.
In the evening, Charlie called. Charlie had been his best friend since school. He wasn't strong in applied sciences or higher mathematics, but he was that guy who stays by your side when everyone else leaves. "Hey, well, is the spot yours?" Charlie asked. "It seems they need a little time to make a decision," Clayton replied and laughed softly. "All right, let's meet at 8 today at the Ship's Lounge. It'll be a good evening, I promise." Ship's Lounge was their sanctuary. It was a place where everyone knew Clayton and where his height didn't matter. In the evening, they sat at a table with glasses of hoppy ale. From the side, they resembled Timon and Pumbaa. Charlie was 5.91 feet tall and looked like a hero from the movie Braveheart, only with a kind heart and without the war paint. And then, 3 men in business suits walked into the bar. They noisily sat down at a table. Among them was Mr. Gordon, the very same Mr. Gordon who had promised to return to the office in 2 hours, but had ended up in a bar instead. Clayton spotted him immediately, but he didn't approach him. He didn't hold a grudge. Clayton didn't want to cause Mr. Gordon discomfort with questions about why the words of a man who invited him to the office were worth nothing. The evening went great. He and Charlie laughed, drank ale, and eventually went their separate ways in the best of spirits. Because sometimes life isn't just about work. It's also about those who drink ale with you when work goes to hell. Chapter 4. The strangest offer in the history of hiring. Mondays in Dallas always smell the same. Strong coffee and a poorly hidden reluctance to admit that the weekend is over. Mr. Gordon was walking to work, and a face was haunting him. You know how it is when the brain hooks on to some detail like a splinter on a sweater and won't let go?
It was the face of that boy from the office, the one he had seen in the ship's lounge bar on Saturday night while he himself was drinking ale and trying to forget about quarterly reports. Mr. Gordon walked into the office. He stopped at the secretary's desk and picked up a newspaper just to keep his hands busy. But the letters were blurring. "Laura," he called out without looking at her, "give me the number of the third candidate. I think his name is Clayton." "Yes, Mr. Gordon. 1 second." 10 minutes later, Mr. Gordon was already holding the phone. Men of his level rarely call themselves to apologize, but sometimes conscience is a very noisy neighbor. "Clayton, this is Mr. Gordon. Sorry about that missed opportunity to talk in the office. Can we meet tomorrow at 12? I'd like to clear everything up, okay? See you then." For Clayton, this was like a plot twist in a movie he was already planning to turn off. On Tuesday, he prepared. He put on his best suit in the smallest size he could find, the one for that 5.25 feet mark that the medical miracle had managed to stretch his height to. He tied his shoelaces tightly, as if he were going to battle rather than an interview. At the door, he was met by Laura again. "Good afternoon, young man. How can I help you?" she asked in that tone that asks, "Did you lose your mommy?" "I have an appointment for 12 with Mr. Gordon," Clayton replied. "Please let him know I'm here." Laura still didn't understand anything, but she had instructions. "Clayton, come in," Gordon shouted loudly from his office. When they were face to face, a pause hung in the air. It was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Clayton didn't wait. He immediately laid his trumps on the table: diplomas, blueprints, and his driver's license. This was his way of erasing the expression of bewilderment from Gordon's face. "Look here," these papers said. "Inside this small body lives a man who understands microcircuits better than you understand raising children." Soon they began to understand each other. Mr. Gordon had a problem. His son, Thomas, was 14. Thomas took neither his father, nor school, nor life in general seriously. He was at that age where parents seem like an annoying obstacle on the path to self-development, which usually consists of truancy. Mr. Gordon felt he was losing touch with his son. The harder he pulled him toward the light, the deeper Thomas went into the shadows.
And then an idea struck Gordon. It was crazy. It was absolutely idiotic by the standards of any normal person. "Listen, Clayton," Gordon leaned forward. "I have a wild idea. I want you to pretend to be my nephew and bond with my son. Don't be in a hurry to refuse. I've tried everything. Tutors, trainers, coaches, nothing works. But when I see you, with your talent and your unique appearance, I feel like you are my salvation. Become Zach from Nebraska for 3 weeks. My real nephew is the same age, but they've never met. Set an example for him that he hasn't had. Let him see opportunity where he only sees boredom." Clayton was silent for a long time. He tried to process what he heard. "So you want me to do his homework and carry his backpack?" he clarified. "No, I want you to become for him whoever he wants to be. I'm offering you a contract. In 6 months, I will approve your position as an engineer. The management will have approved the budget by then. And for these 3 weeks with my son, I will pay you $20,000. I think this could work. What do you say?" Clayton wasn't used to offers to work as a nanny, especially considering his degree from the University of Texas. "I need to think," he said. He left the office holding his blueprints, which had just lost the competition to the position of a fake cousin. He sat in his car and just stared into the void. The phone in his pocket vibrated. An SMS from Mr. Gordon. $30,000 and 4 weeks. Agreed? Clayton looked at the message. And what exactly did he have to lose? In a world where you are mistaken for a teenager, sometimes it's worth taking full advantage of it. 30,000 is a good sum. It would always find a use. He typed back, "Okay." Thus began this crazy game. Gordon brought albums, CDs, photos of relatives from Nebraska. He tried to cram the history of someone else's family into Clayton, getting confused with names and dates. Clayton listened, memorized, and sighed. "Is it a deal? Pack your suitcase and move in with me. I hope our scam pays off." "Let's do this," Clayton replied. "But if something goes wrong, I'll let you know." Chapter 5. Back to School. Every adult has their personal nightmare. Some dream they are naked at an important presentation, others that they forgot to turn off the iron. Clayton was now about to live his nightmare in reality, going back to school. The next morning, Clayton did an inventory of his wardrobe. He needed to look like Zach from Nebraska, not like an engineer who really loves sales in the teen department. He packed his things into 2 suitcases. He told his acquaintances he was going on a business trip. In a sense, it was the literal truth, the strangest business trip in human history. Mr. Gordon's car was waiting at the entrance. Clayton was only glad about one thing. Gordon's house was on the other side of Dallas. The chance that he would meet someone he actually knew while walking with a school backpack was equal to the chance of meeting a penguin in the center of Texas. Not impossible, but highly unlikely. Gordon, showing wonders of resourcefulness and probably using a couple of old connections, prepared the transfer documents for his nephew. So everything wouldn't look completely idiotic, he even composed a legend about family circumstances in Nebraska. They drove into a neighborhood where the lawns were trimmed so perfectly it looked like they were leveled with a ruler every morning at 5 o'clock. The houses here cost as much as 10 annual salaries of an average American, and each of them radiated confidence in tomorrow. "Let's begin, I suppose," sighed Mr. Gordon, parking. "I'm no less worried than you. Your room is on the 2nd floor at the end of the hallway. I'm divorced from my wife, so hopefully you won't have to see her. We don't need unnecessary questions." The first family dinner was quiet. Silence at the table in wealthy homes usually weighs more than any argument. Clayton and Gordon sat in anticipation. Finally, footsteps were heard on the stairs, heavy and reluctant, like those of a man being led to the scaffold rather than to a plate of pasta. Thomas appeared. "Hey, and who are you?" Thomas asked, examining the stranger with that adolescent squint that means you're on my territory and you better have a good reason for being here. "This is Zach, your cousin from Nebraska. He'll be staying with us." "Well, hey," Thomas tossed out. They chatted a bit, fitting the script to reality. The legend of Zach landed on the soil of the family dinner surprisingly smoothly. "School for both of you tomorrow. Don't oversleep," Gordon said before they parted. "Thomas, show Zach how everything works there." At that moment, Clayton looked at Gordon as if he had just suggested he jump into a volcano without a safety rope. "School? Tomorrow? But I'm not ready," Clayton hissed once Thomas left. His whole appearance tried to show, "What school? This wasn't in the contract. What is this crap?" "Oh, I've settled everything with the transfer, don't worry, and the backpack is already waiting for you in your room." "Super. Thanks, Mr. Gordon," Clayton hissed through his teeth.
They had a tough talk in the basement, but the sight of the first check and the reminder of the future engineer's chair did their job. Gordon knew how to be persuasive when his son's future and his $30,000 was at stake. Morning came. The yellow bus, that iron symbol of the educational system, arrived on time. At first, the conversation on the bus didn't stick. Thomas spoke a language consisting of slang, abbreviations, and memes incomprehensible to Clayton. It was like radio signals from another galaxy. But Clayton was an engineer. He knew how to decode signals. Back to school again, Clayton thought, looking at the crowd of teenagers flowing into the doors of the building. It was like returning to the past, only now he knew how this world worked. The first day was a triumph. Clayton lied a little, adding a drop of coolness to Zach's legend that he once lacked. But his main weapon was his brain. When a 28-year-old man who graduated from the University of Texas with honors sits at a 9th grade desk, something incredible happens. Clayton annihilated the math and history teachers in the very first hour. Over dinner, Thomas couldn't contain his emotions. "Dad, you should have seen it. Zach just wiped the floor with the math guy, and how he knows American classics. It was unreal." Gordon and Clayton exchanged looks. Hope shone in Gordon's eyes. In Clayton's eyes was the slight weariness of a man who had just retaken an exam he passed 10 years ago. "Zach, be careful with the grades," Gordon smiled. "Parents in Nebraska might not believe in such sudden success." The plan was working perfectly. A week passed, then a second. Thomas began to change.
He stopped skipping classes because going to school with a cool cousin was more interesting than hanging around back alleys. He changed his wardrobe, started taking care of himself, and most importantly, he began to believe that being smart didn't mean being a loser. Thomas was infected with the idea of being like Zach. It cost Clayton nothing. He was just being himself. But for Thomas, it was a revelation. 3 weeks flew by like one day. The contract was coming to an end, and all participants in the conspiracy had already begun to taste victory. But life, as we know, likes to add surprises to the script when you least expect them. Monday of the final week arrived. Zach and Thomas were sitting in their usual seats on the bus when a rumor reached them from the front seats. The literature teacher had been replaced. A common thing. Someone got sick, someone left. Second period was literature. Clayton walked into the classroom and froze. His heart did a somersault and fell somewhere into the area of his new school shoes. They had sent a young and ambitious substitute. Standing in the doorway was Gloria, Clayton's former classmate, his first and greatest unrequited love, the very one who knew the real Clayton. That's it. It's over, Clayton thought as Gloria opened the grade book.
Chapter 6. A Ghost from the Past at Literature Lesson. When you lie, you build a house of cards. You try very hard to make the walls straight and the foundation strong, but you always forget about drafts. And life is one continuous draft. Second period was literature. Clayton froze at the classroom threshold as if he had run into an invisible wall. Substitutes are usually sent in the form of bored pensioners or yesterday's students who don't care who is sitting at the desk. But on this day, fate decided that 3 weeks of peace was too generous a gift. Sitting at the teacher's desk was Gloria. She was still the same smile, the same gaze that once made Clayton's heart beat with the frequency of a malfunctioning processor. Gloria had been his classmate, his first, great, and of course, absolutely unrequited love. She was the person who knew the real him, not Zach from Nebraska, but Clayton, the guy who was always a bit shorter and a bit smarter than the others. His first impulse was to run, simply turn around and disappear before the house of cards collapsed on his head. But as soon as he thought of it, one of the students slammed the door shut behind him with a bang. Clayton was trapped. "Take your seats," Gloria said, and her voice passed through him like an electric discharge. He sat at the very back desk, trying to blend in with the color of the wall. The lesson began. It seemed to Clayton that Gloria didn't take her eyes off him. Pictures, each more terrifying than the last, painted themselves in his head. Here she comes up to him, pats him on the shoulder, and asks in front of the whole class why a 28-year-old engineer decided to study punctuation rules again. Time slowed down. The air in the classroom became thick like cement, and his mouth went as dry as if he had just eaten a pack of chalk. Finally, the bell rang. The classroom exploded with noise. Everyone rushed for the exit, eager to be free as soon as possible. Clayton grabbed his backpack, preparing to dissolve into the crowd. One turn, one step to the door, and there they were, looking each other straight in the eye. "Hi, Clayton," Gloria said, calmly, without a shadow of a doubt. "Could you stay for a couple of minutes?" Of course she recognized him. How could she not? A person whose heart once belonged to her couldn't simply vanish from memory, even if he decided to change his name and place of residence. The classroom emptied. They were left alone among the empty desks and the smell of old textbooks. Gloria needed the truth. She looked at him, and it became clear to Clayton a CIA legend wouldn't help here, though he had seriously considered it. They sat down. It was easier to catch their breath that way, especially for Clayton, whose legs had turned to jelly. And he began to tell the story. Slowly, stuttering, he laid it all out. About Texas Instruments, about Mr. Gordon, about Thomas, and about those very $30,000 that made him put on a school backpack again.
It was a long story. Gloria listened in silence. When he finished, she agreed not to give away his secret, at least until the end of the week. But Clayton already felt that Operation Zach had developed a crack. He returned to Mr. Gordon's house in a state of a mild panic attack. "It's all over," he informed Gordon right from the doorstep. "The operation has failed. Well, not completely failed, but it's no longer possible to keep everything under wraps." He told him about Gloria. Clayton understood. He needed to put an end to this story before it turned into something truly sad. He and Gloria agreed to meet in the evening at Kubi's Sausage House. Once, while still a student, Clayton had dreamed of inviting her to this very cafe. But back then, he was afraid she wouldn't want to get involved with a guy who looked more like her younger brother than a companion for a date. They met. He told her everything once again, from beginning to end, without embellishment or excuses. Gloria thanked him for dinner, but asked him to finish this scam as soon as possible, for his own sake and for Mr. Gordon's. The story was too fragile to last long. Clayton confessed to her that, despite all this absurdity, he was glad they had finally spent an evening together. A small remark from fate: the whole evening, they were being watched by Thomas's classmate, who happened to be in the same cafe for her parents' wedding anniversary. And at 14, any information spreads faster than a virus. "Guess who I saw yesterday?" This phrase had already begun its journey through the school hallways. Returning home, Clayton had a serious talk with Mr. Gordon. "We have to stop this now," Clayton said, "before the script finally gets out of control." They decided that Zach must immediately return to Nebraska, urgently, to his parents. The sooner the better. On Tuesday, Thomas and Clayton, or Zach as Thomas was used to calling him, said goodbye before the long journey. They promised not to lose touch. Over these weeks, Thomas had truly changed. He had picked up manners, found new goals, and sincerely wanted to be like his cousin. This was an unconditional victory for Clayton. They loaded the things into the car. Mr. Gordon walked his son to the school bus and then returned to Clayton. "Well then, Clayton," he said, and relief could be heard in his voice. "Everything went much better than we anticipated. Thank you. You've done something incredible." He handed Clayton an envelope with the remainder of the fee and delivered him to the doors of his real home. Meanwhile, at school, passions were boiling. The account of the witness from the cafe about Zach and Miss Gloria was overgrown with such details that Thomas himself began to ask questions. But Zach was no longer there. He had returned to his life. 3 months later, Clayton was officially confirmed for the engineer position at Texas Instruments. And believe me, he got this job solely due to his professional qualities. This company needed him just as much as Mr. Gordon had needed a connection with his son. And Gloria? Gloria herself secretly started a rumor that Zach was actually a secret CIA agent undercover. Thomas liked this version. After all, who doesn't want to have a spy cousin? After some more time, Miss Gloria sent a text to the secret agent to check his plans for the evening, because there aren't that many good agents in this world if you look closely, even if they are short in stature.